Uh, but I just want to thank you guys for having me. It's a truly great opportunity to visit this campus and to be here in Michigan. It's a lovely change of pace from the Washington, D.C. area where I live, where traffic usually means that going 9 miles takes 2 hours, and there's not a lot of fields and open spaces to be had, so I'm enjoying it. When I was a little girl, I was obsessed with books. I grew up in a town of 3,000 people in rural Idaho, surrounded by fields of corn and potatoes and mint. As a homeschooler, I had the educational flexibility to spend a lot of time in the written word and a little less time on chemistry and algebra. So I delved into C.S. I'm glad we have some other people who appreciate that. So I delved into C.S. Lewis and Jane Austen and similar authors. My imagination carried me to England and Middle Earth, across the seas with Horatio Hornblower, and through the wild woods of Indiana with Gene Stratton Porter. But my discontent also grew with my literary appetite. I had little in common with the people in my community, and I struggled to make friends among my peers. I didn't listen to the same music or watch the same TV series. I didn't enjoy motorcycle racing or car shows. And while I truly loved my Idaho community, my church and family, I also felt very alone. So when I left Idaho for a college out east, I was looking for community and for identity, a place where I might find kindred spirits, a place where I might fit in and feel at home. Yet I found that in reality, this enclave of learning and the classical liberal arts made me feel even more like a sojourner, an alien, like a person living between two worlds. While at college, I yearned for Idaho, the smell of mint in late summer, my grandmother's peach pie, the easy, warm humor of my family. I felt like the college environment grew my brain and my understanding of the world, but it also felt communally homogenous. We were all nerds who could spend hours dissecting and overanalyzing the latest Harry Potter movie. But we had little to no interest in those different from us, in passion, in pursuit. My vocabulary was peppered with new words like laissez-faire and solipsism, but the world I was growing into also importantly lived apart from the ordinary folk and common sense ideas that undergirded my growing up years. The liberal arts, despite their conservatism, can create rifts between a community and its returning youth. During college, I learned philosophies that explained to me why I believed what I believed, why my forefathers believed what they did, and why I wished myself to believe the same things. I sat at the feet of Plato and Aristotle, St. Augustine and St. Benedict, Edmund Burke and Russell Kirk, Alexis de Tocqueville and Plato. I said Plato twice. I learned from them new truths about faith, gratitude, and grace, how we ought to live in the city of man while also constituting a heavenly citizenry. But visits home to Idaho showed me that I had changed. I would struggle to connect with childhood friends whose lives were very much different from my own. I was growing into staunch opinions, some of which were decidedly counter to those expressed by my parents and grandparents. While my education had united us on all that truly mattered, the core tenets of our faith, our devotion to kith and kin, it had also shaped me in ways that surprised them. It wasn't that the ideas I'd absorbed or pastimes I pursued made me feel superior. Rather, our value systems had interwoven themselves around different beliefs and pursuits. I was reminded of a college friend I talked to a couple years after he graduated. Back home in Iowa, Adam found his education distanced him somewhat from his country community, even from his father, who often became frustrated with his son's intellectualism. You can read books and quote fancy authors, but at the end of the day, what are you left with? His father would ask. Adam recognized the disconnect between the types of knowledge that he and his father found valuable. Adam believed philosophy and abstract concepts were important, but in his rural town, all considerations boiled down to the question, what can I do in order to do good? In his book, The Little Way of Ruthie Lemon, journalist and author Rod Dreher reports feeling a similar chasm when visiting his Louisiana hometown. His sister Ruthie wanted to do tangible good in a local arena. In contrast, Rod was a man of ideas. He sought to foster the true, the good, and the beautiful through his writing. But this conception of doing good was difficult for Ruthie to understand. Both pragmatism and intellectualism are essential to healthy community, but unfortunately, those who have a propensity toward one or the other often find it difficult to converse gracefully with each other. Christopher Lasch once wrote that the thinking classes live in a world of abstractions and images, while most working class people live in a palpable reality dominated by honest manual labor. This separation can breed contempt and misunderstanding. As I got journalism internships and work in Washington, D.C., this problem threatened to loom even larger. Capitol Hill politics are obsessive, incessant, and a world unto themselves. Their sphere of happy hours, hobnobbing with rich donors and wizened politicians, experienced lobbyists, and intellectual think tank members can swallow you whole. And they'll spit you back out wearing tortoiseshell glasses, attending the opera on weekends, and sneering at Trump voters in between sips of champagne. I think I would have fallen head over heels into this world, if not for a couple wise and wonderful people that God placed in my life. The first is a philosopher, writer, and farmer named Wendell Berry. I think many of you already know of him. Berry is, simply put, a lover of words and ideas who embraced his place rather than leaving it behind. Reading Berry's books filled my soul with a longing for my homeland, for the traditions and history of my farming forefathers, and for the simple wisdom and beauty of their grounded neighborly living. But Wendell Berry also showed me where and how my nerdiness and my passions could fit into this world. He encouraged me to use them as a gift to the community that raised me. He showed me that the most poetic and glorious things are often, if not always, the everyday things. Violets in a field, iced tea after a hard day's work, listening to my grandfather hum his favorite gospel hymn. Wendell Berry revealed and put words to the enchantment and longing that I felt for that life, apart from the glamour and hum of the city. Also importantly, God put another thoughtful and wise man into my life, my future husband. Eli was raised in Minnesota on old-fashioned hospitality, potlucks, and lots of casseroles, just like me. He is a small-town country boy with a bright mind and an open, generous heart. He grew up among farms and rivers. He loves reading biographies and sci-fi, building tables and carving wooden toys, working on landscaping projects and hiking. When I brought him home to meet my family for the first time, they were elated. He fit right in. Eli listened and listens to my ramblings about intellectualism and philosophers and Washington politics, but he also draws me out of my cocoon of introspection into fellowship and community. He strongly dislikes Washington snobbery and elitism and has always been quick to point it out and to steer me away from it. He's helped me guide that fine divide between living in a world of abstractions and images, as Lasch puts it, and living in a palpable reality dominated by honest manual labor. Together, we're trying to craft a life that both values the books and the fancy authors and seeks to ask that vital question, what can we do in order to do good? David Wasserman recently wrote for 538 that November's presidential election was an exclamation point or perhaps a flashing danger sign. And he didn't write this because Donald Trump won the presidency. He wrote this because of the deep geographical and ideological schisms that this election demonstrated among the electorate. America's political fabric, he wrote, geographically is tearing apart. Communities are doubling down on partisan ties. In over a third of the nation's counties, one candidate or the other won by an extreme landslide among voters. In many, one candidate or the other won by 80%. Our nation is almost entirely red or blue. There is no in-between. And the shock with which Trump's win was heralded by the national media signaled a disconnect and distrust that has continued to permeate our political and cultural environment. Works like J.D. Vance's Hillbilly Elegy hinted at a world of separation and even blindness, dividing the wealthy and the politicians from the rural folk in West Virginia, Appalachia, or Georgia. Damon Linker wrote recently at The Week that since the time of Aristotle, political philosophers have noted that those who live in cities have a different sensibility than those who live in the countryside. Thomas Jefferson famously declared that republican government needed to be founded on the virtues practiced and fostered by yeoman farmers, and fretted that commerce encourages vices that could be incompatible with it. Alexander Hamilton, meanwhile, placed his hopes for the future of the country in capitalistic dynamism and technological modernity, both of which were most highly developed in urban centers. Today, we face problems generated less by the triumph of one alternative over the other than by the persistence of each and the increasingly rancorous clash between them. As John Steinbeck wrote in East of Eden, learning made a boy leave the farm to live in the city and to consider himself better than his father. This sense of superiority and disdain is something I've seen in cosmopolitan areas, a disrespect for roots and traditions, a misunderstanding of what they signify and why they matter. Because of this, there is a vital role to be played in this world by people who can close the gap between red and blue, who have their feet in two worlds, one in the rural and another in the polis. Eli and I have now lived in Alexandria, Virginia for 4 years. I've worked as a journalist inside and outside DC for the duration of that time. And as the years have passed, I've morphed into a new role and a new way of thinking, one that feels less alienated despite its strange position bookending two worlds. What I've learned is that the virtues of my growing up years, the hospitality, the neighborliness, the love of working with one's hands, are virtues sorely needed in the city. The values, the sense of loyalty and duty help bring otherwise fragmented and fractured communities together. I found that DC folk love to gather around a bonfire with a fiddle and some rhubarb pie. Bringing little bits of Idaho to DC through food and drink, words and song, values and virtues have helped bring touches of home to my urban environment. Eventually, I'd love to move back to Idaho, but right now, I think God has placed me in this city at this highly fragmented time for a reason. Few of my neighbors or friends in DC know a single Trump voter. I know many, and I love both the DC intellectuals and the Trump voters. That gives me a perspective that I believe others need badly right now. Who knows where some of you students will head next upon graduation or summer break. Perhaps you will head off to grad school, get a job in a nearby city, or move back to your hometown. And I hope at least a few of you can do that. Perhaps some of you will find yourselves out east like me. But regardless of where you end up, I would strongly encourage you to look at the roots God has given you, the family, the place, the faith, and seek to tend and nourish them wherever you're planted next. Don't take light the ordinary faithful lives that have brought you where you are today, whether a parent or guardian, pastor, a counselor, teacher, or friend. Whoever helped shape who you are today, thank them, and then seek to serve them with the newfound talents and skills you have cultivated while at school. And as you go out into new lands and experiences, seek to be a bridge between Spring Arbor and the rest of the world. Perhaps one of the greatest challenges of my life has been navigating the road between love of my homeland and love of the new home that I've currently been given. But one of the greatest lessons I have learned thus far is this, that our homes on earth are like tendrils shooting off from a principal root. Each, as long as they are strong, contribute to the health of the plant. Each, if connected to the principal root, will thrive. That principal root is our heavenly citizenship and our relationship to Christ. We read in God's word that Christ is the cornerstone, the living water, the bread of life. Throughout Scripture, he is always the sustainer and the foundation. To think of Christ as the one who grounds us, no matter how or where we might be transplanted, is to finally realize where home can be found. It is to realize that we can satiate the homesickness that no place in this world can satisfy. We are never fully at home here. Our home is elsewhere, and as long as we seek full nourishment in this temporal soil, we will remain hungry. But if we live knowing where our eternal citizenship rests, aware of the place and membership we owe ultimate allegiance to, we are free to be planted and transplanted with equal grace, to know and love each person and place deeply with a vulnerability born out of faith. Faith that, no matter what the future brings, we will be blessed for honoring this present moment and these present people. No matter our differences, we are fellow creatures on a singular journey. And perhaps, just maybe, in this fraught and fractured world, the people with feet in two places and love in two lands can help draw everyone closer together. Thank you. that makes any questions come to mind. But if there's anything related to what I said or anything related to journalism, careers, anything else, Wendell Berry, you've got experts for that already. Yeah. The differences between the two? I think, to some extent that's something that continues to be resolved and continues to change. I grew up in small town Idaho where everyone knew me because they knew my dad and my granddad and my great-granddad. So when you walked around Fruitland, Idaho, you introduced yourself as Rick's daughter or Wally's granddaughter. In fact, I'm going home in a couple weeks to talk to some farmers, and I've been introducing myself on the phone. Hi, I'm Gracie, I'm a writer, I'm Wally's granddaughter, because that makes them actually want to talk to me as opposed to just being some stranger. So there's this sense of a social fabric that's knit, that's been going back for generations, that kind of holds everything together and encourages people to trust each other. And in the city, you don't have that. You have people, especially in DC, who have been moving about for quite some time. Some of them are military families who just move around a lot in general. Some of them are getting internships or political work in the city, which is highly fluctuating depending on the political environment and who's in power. Some of them might be going to college. Some of them are young professionals who just will end up maybe eventually moving out to the suburbs. So you struggle to meet your neighbors because to some extent your neighbors don't necessarily want to meet you. They commute a lot, they're busy, they're tired. They have friends elsewhere, so it's very hard to create that social fabric out of nothing. And I think as church membership also has declined in cities, it becomes difficult to find venues in which people can truly and deeply connect. So it's a dilemma that I have found is most easily remedied by going on walks with a dog and a baby and stopping and talking to the people who seem to want to be stopped and talked to, and starting there and then going on from there, one piece at a time. So people no longer know me as Wally's granddaughter, they know me as Hobbs' owner, which works for now. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Unlike United, you're coming back finding when you're trying to create community, you see it as well. How much really can you find anything what you have in establishment?
Right. I do think it is to some extent subculture and monastic because there are so many people and there's so many subcultures of people. In the community where I live, there's a lot of diversity, which I love. But sometimes it's hard to reach out because I've found that, we have neighbors across from us who are Latino and they all hang out together. And I haven't had as many opportunities to talk with them because they have a vibrant subculture that's very powerful and very wonderful. And sometimes insinuating yourself into other people's subcultures can be kind of difficult. Meanwhile, a lot of people commute to church, which is also difficult because if you end up commuting to church, then you've got a subculture over here, right, in, say, the town 5 miles over or whatever. And then you've got your work culture, and a lot of people in DC operate this way. And I've recently talked to some who've been very concerned by it because they've said when you've got 5 different subcultures that you operate in, your school friends, your church friends, your work friends, what have you, your neighborhood friends, you can be a completely different person in each world and no one will ever know. So I think the difficulty and perhaps the challenge for people in the city going forward is finding a place where they can live, work, worship, shop, and perhaps even educate their children, and trying to keep all of that within, say, a 2 to 5 mile radius. And we're not doing that as well as I would like, partly because we have family who live probably 40 minutes away from us, so we spend a lot of time with them out in the country whenever we get the chance. But I do think that perhaps the best chance at building that sort of fabric in the city would come from just kind of seizing on this idea of, this is my place, I'm going to do everything here, and I'm going to know everyone within this 2 mile radius, starting a little bit at a time. Yeah. Yeah.
So you talked some about the virtues, that you can bring from the country to the city. You talked some of the virtues the city can teach us, either in the city or the city can bring to the country.
Mm-hmm. I think diversity and inclusion are very important. My community didn't struggle with racism that I saw perhaps in some other communities growing up, but there's still a sense in which the people of similar backgrounds hang out together. The city is guilty of this, but on more of a economic level. It's very class stratified. In Alexandria, where I live, the super zip, which is what you call a zip code with people in it who live in with millions of dollars, who own homes that are millions of dollar homes, they all live right next to each other. And in order to get to the parts of town where people live with less, you've got to drive several miles. So it's not so much maybe intentional, except that where they buy their homes and where they hang out will end up being places where they never see people from a different strata of life. Whereas where I grew up, income levels were very mixed. I went to church with people who would have lived below the poverty line, but when it came to ideology and race, it wasn't as mixed, and I think that can be a problem. I do think, too, that there was a sense in which, and still is, intellectual thought and the abstract ideas that I talked about are seen as snobbish no matter what, no matter how they're presented. You can't bring up the name of Plato without someone rolling their eyes at you because you're being too cerebral, you're not being practical. And that can make conversation very difficult. I think we live in a time when we need to bring up a lot of these thoughtful people who had ideas that shaped our world in ways that now we're experiencing the consequences of it. You can't just say that it's Hillary Clinton's fault that our world is the way it is, because she was heir to a whole set of ideas that have gone back for generations. So we need to talk about the whole package. And I think that people in cities are much more eager to do that than a lot of people I grew up with. And that's where I think the disconnect came, where for Adam, for instance, when he's talking about, say, probably political issues with his dad, and he comes at him with a point that says, well, Republicans may not be right for this or that reason, and it's something he pulled from his school education. His dad didn't see that as something he could take seriously because it came from an old book with an old name as opposed to something he could see and taste and touch here and now. So that is a big challenge sometimes. But. Yeah, they do, and so I have this funny rule of thumb I've crafted, and it's when I write something, after I've finished the draft that I think I'm ready to publish, I sit back and I pretend like I'm like 5 people that I know sitting down and reading it, and I try to read it from their perspective. So one's my farmer grandpa, one's this wonderful Mennonite woman I grew up with who reads everything that I post on Facebook, so I know she's gonna read it. One is a friend of mine from college. She's a lesbian and more of a liberal. One would be the economic populist Bernie Sanders fan that I have in DC. And then the other is probably my dad and mom, just because I think I respect their opinions for a lot of reasons. And Eli, of course, but I already kind of have his voice in my head as I'm writing. So my goal is, when I think about these people, not to please them all. That's never going to happen. But to make sure that if they read this, they're going to say, oh, that was thoughtful and measured and kind. That wasn't shouting at me at any point in any way. And this is something I'd like to talk to her about in person. Because they probably will. And if they don't like it, they'll probably send me an email. So I want to make sure that it's at least something that they find engaging, even if they disagree with it. So, yeah. Not generally. I have gotten texts when I've spoken slightly favorably of Obama that pointed out that I needed to do more reading from a talk show radio friend, listening friend of mine. But yeah, that's good. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think this is something that we've talked about, or at least that I've heard talked about some, is, would Wendell Berry love Kentucky as much as he did if he'd never gone to New York or Italy? He's this great arguer for place, and yet there's this paradox sometimes that you see, that when you leave, sometimes you come back with a greater passion for what you left behind. And we see this in The Lord of the Rings. You know, it was the love of the Shire that really got Frodo and Sam all the way through the worst experiences of their life. But also, the Shire that they left was never going to be the same one they returned to, not just for reasons of temporal change and everything that happened while they were gone, but because they themselves had grown into this love and reverence for it that they didn't have before. Because I received a classical liberal arts education as a homeschooler, I think all of those seeds were there and just needed to be grown and tended maybe a little more. And perhaps I think a lot of the same bent would be there. However, one thing that I do know is that I never probably would have been introduced to someone like Wendell Berry if I had stayed. There's not a lot of people like that, thinkers like that, well known as of yet within the communities I was a part of. And he was so instrumental in really helping me marry those loves. I don't know if I would have made the connections that I have without having left. So it's an interesting question. Yeah. Okay, that's great. That's a great question. Yes, I think that one of the great blessings of reading and enjoying some of these older thinkers like Wendell Berry is that they emphasize how important it is to respect your elders. And one thing I have noticed among other writers of my generation is that there's a sense of, well, and this is true of all of us to some extent, we think we know everything, and it's very easy when someone says something we don't like to kind of just, want to slap them across the face, even if they're our elders. And that's such a dangerous position to take, and it's highly disrespectful. I think one of the only disadvantages, perhaps, of a very strong, rigorous classical liberal arts education is that you come back knowing so much that your grandpa doesn't know. if you come from kind of more of a working class background. And that's quite sad, actually, in the sense that he knows so much more than you. But because you have this storehouse of knowledge in a discipline that he was never introduced to, it can cause this sense of superiority that's very dangerous. And so in as much as I've observed it in my own life or in the lives of others, I've found that both the Word of God and very thoughtful authors who respect all sorts of knowledge, not just what happens in the halls of academia, help kind of combat that tendency within ourselves. And it's important to stay humble, I think, as a senior who's come out of so much and has learned so much, and might return to an area where people don't know the same things and don't have the same experiences because they have so much to teach you. My husband actually is not someone who went to a normal university. He's got an engineering degree. He's an avionics technician, so he works on F-16s in the military. So his storehouse of knowledge is 180 from mine. Like, he knows stuff about how to fix an F-16 and keep people alive in the air and how to do physics in ways that I would never be able to imagine. And yet I know more authors than he does, which it's beautiful because in our marriage then there's this meeting of the minds where he teaches me things I never would otherwise seek out, and I'm able to bring to him books that he never otherwise would have read. So we joked about this the other day because we went on a trip. He got back from a deployment and we had a little weekend getaway to the beach, and he brought with him Albert Camus' The Fall to read. And we were sitting on the beach and he was telling me how much he was enjoying this book and how thought-provoking it was. And I said, so you don't remember me bringing up this book to you in the past? And he said, no. I said, well, there was this one time where senior year I was talking to you about this, an existentialist philosophy and stuff, on the phone. And I was in the airport waiting for a flight home to Idaho, and I was just rattling on and on about Albert Camus, and eventually realized he'd fallen asleep. He had caught very little of my thoughts on this subject. So that was what, probably 4 or 5 years ago, and now, like 3 months ago, he's reading Albert Camus. So marriage changes you in good ways and in little ways, and I just thought that was such a funny picture of our relationship and how both of us have changed in a lot of ways since we were first getting to know each other. So, yes.
I also wanted to ask from career life,
Mm-hmm. Excellent. So internships are important. Actually, I was talking to someone about this today. It's very important to get every opportunity you can to write under an editor, because they help make you a better writer that's then more hireable down the line. I think small town newspapers are great opportunities, and actually that stands out on a resume these days because not a lot of people have done that sort of on the ground work, and it's really demonstrative of an ability to interview people and get good stories and do good work. Design abilities are also, I think, to some extent important. If you can work with the Adobe Design Suite at least a little bit, knowing your way around how to work the program, that may be just the little leg up you need to get an internship or a job that you may not otherwise have, because a lot of people in journalism right now are wearing multiple hats. And while I was working for the American Conservative, I was an intern supervisor and a writer, and I helped edit copy, but I also laid out the print magazine because they needed someone who knew how to run Adobe who could do it. So that's how I got the job. So internships are really important, and if you can get a lot of them, it can help kind of push you on to the next level, because a lot of journalism right now is just knowing people. It's knowing folks who can help connect you with that editor who might then be able to get you an internship somewhere. And that's kind of sad, because I wish that more people had opportunities to just kind of cold call the New York Times and get hired, but unfortunately that's not the reality that we have. So the more you can start getting those internships now, the more you build out a resume of experience, and the more you meet people that help you kind of step into that world. And then reading is really important, not just reading the news, but reading books about the ideas that then formulate the news. I think Neil Postman's Amusing Ourselves to Death should be required reading for every journalist right now. And I think that if you can read a lot of thoughtful economists and political thinkers, people like Alexis de Tocqueville even just help give you an understanding of what's happening in our world today. And then that helps you figure out what stories really should be told and aren't being told yet. So hopefully that's helpful. Yeah.
You obviously know about the language, but obviously news changes based on
Yes.
online, chat, and so anything else you can say, I guess we started there, read things that are published in a short cycle.
Yes.
So how
Yeah.
else do you resist the sort of
I am struggling with that question on a daily basis and have been for the last 4 years. Because everything moves so fast right now. And it's very difficult with a president who likes to tweet, because everyone's responding to the latest hot take, and everyone then responds to the takes on the hot take, and then the takes of the takes of the hot take. And so it goes on and on and on. And by the time you try to read what happened yesterday, a million things have happened. And editors expect you to be on top of all this. And it's very difficult to take a step back at any point in the cycle. I've been reading tax policy all week because of the tax policy that was dropped, and because some editor wants me to write about it, and I have very little thoughtful stuff to say, and yet I have to learn because it's what everyone's writing about. So this is kind of the difficulty that we've gotten ourselves into with online news. It's shared so quickly, it happens so fast, people are responding so immediately that being able to take a step back and say, whoa, let's pause, is almost impossible. So myself personally, what I've been trying to do is make sure that I'm reading from a handful of publications that I like, that come at the news from different angles, and that I read those pieces thoroughly. And then, once I've done that, I might write whatever I have to write or edit whatever I have to edit, and then I try to take a break. I have a 16-month-old who likes attention, and so that's a good excuse to step away from everything and the phone and to go for a walk and go to the park and play with the dog and maybe garden a little bit and step away, and then come back and see what's happened in the last 3 hours I've been gone, because inevitably something has happened. And once again, kind of see if I can find some pieces that write about it thoughtfully, and then step away. Right now, I'm trying to not watch as much Netflix in the evening and actually read some thoughtful books. I've realized that I've been kind of just hobbling along on the fumes of a lot of philosophical works that I read like a year or so ago, and I need to rejuvenate my mind with some fresh thought, just in part because as a journalist you have to be a polymath who keeps learning, and you need fresh words and fresh things to kind of inspire what you write. So if I can spend a couple hours in the evening reading, say, Rod Dreher's newest book, or maybe going back and reading something by Plato or Aristotle, rereading is also highly important, I think. Some of that is going to help me the next day more than, watching How I Met Your Mother. So, but it's a discipline, and that's the difficulty too. And I think I have to balance that out then with spending time with Eli and making sure that we're resting, and getting away from all the information, the glut of the news. But I don't know if that's a helpful answer at all. I have to read a lot more than you guys ever will probably have to, which is a huge blessing that you can thank God for. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, the work. Well, because right now I can work from home. That's the one great gift of the online world that we live in, is that I can telecommute. So my editors actually told me, you ever want to move back to Idaho, you can. I don't care. My husband's stationed at a military base, so we don't really have that flexibility right now. But I do think I would trade where I am right now for a country life with a farm in a heartbeat. I like the pace, and as much as I'm into politics right now, I didn't used to read it at all as a girl. Obviously, I was reading C.S. Lewis. I was not, poring over national debates. And so there's a piece of me that always kind of is saying, okay, 10 years down the road or whenever, maybe we'll get to step away from some of this. And I'm very prayerful that maybe, even if it's a small step, maybe if it's just the countryside of Virginia, that would be nice. It's a slower pace of life, so.
Can I follow up on that? So let's just say that you grew up in Fort William.
Yeah.
And you moved away to DC, and now you've got this diversity and stimulation. So imagine yourself moving back to Fort William.
Right.
What trials are you going to, what sort of relearning are you going to have? Can you imagine that?
Oh, I've thought about that a lot, and I am very aware of the fact that both the incessant internet and the constant stimulation have changed me in ways that I'm not always proud of. It's very hard for me to focus sometimes on the things I want to focus on. I'm reading Thomas Merton's autobiography, and his writing is so lyrical and beautiful, but when you've been reading news all day, it's so hard to focus. And I think a lot of people struggle with this. It's not just me. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. But no, the question of that shift is, I think, very, very important, and it would be difficult even to step away from things like the food, the cuisine, the variance of culture that you're exposed to is so neat. So one of my favorite stories on this is my friend Laura grew up in small town Indiana, in kind of an Amish community, and she got married out there 2 summers ago, and I was in her wedding, so we went out. One of the greatest difficulties of living in Alexandria, Virginia, is that brunch on the weekend does not open up till 11 a.m. because city people sleep in. So if you want to go to the latest brunch spot, you have to wait. And Eli and I usually wake up at 8 a.m. even on a Saturday, so it was like every time we wanted to go to these restaurants, we'd end up caving halfway through the morning and just making eggs, because there's no way we're going to make it till 11 before eating breakfast. Maybe college students are probably looking at me like I'm nuts. So we go to this wedding out in the middle of Indiana, and Eli was kind of sick, and I was really tired. We slept until 9 and decided we needed to go get breakfast. Every breakfast joint in this small town Indiana area on a Saturday morning had already closed and was serving lunch. Even McDonald's would not sell us an Egg McMuffin at 9 in the morning on a Saturday because breakfast was already over. So, there's stuff like that. It's just a very tangible representation of the difference between the two cultures. And I think that there's some getting used to, or re-getting used to at least, because I grew up there, that would have to happen, definitely. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. Are you reading? Yes, and actually one thing I've talked to some Patrick Henry College students where I went to school a few times about just general career advice, college advice, and the thing I keep telling them is you have to do the assigned reading. And I'm not saying that to be annoying. I'm saying that because you will regret it so much if you don't. I got asked by this professor who is doing an abridged version of Alexis de Tocqueville's Democracy in America for students. He asked me to write a book blurb for the back of the book. And I couldn't do it because I'd never read the entirety of Democracy in America, and I was too guilty to tell him that because he assumed that I was this writer who talked about Alexis de Tocqueville all the time. So I must have read the whole book, but I had only read the assigned, not even the assigned portions of my reading, and I'd taken good notes, and so I could fake it, but I had never read the whole book thoroughly. And I realized that there were a lot of things like that that I had gotten away with that probably I shouldn't have, and that were now coming back to haunt me a little bit. Nothing's going to do that to you like speaking with someone, you know, on a panel or something like that, who's a professor in this subject and who assumes that you know what they've known, and you have to admit that you just kind of were too busy hanging out with other students on Friday night to finish that assigned reading in college. So as much as you can actually do the reading, it's a good idea. Yeah. Yeah. It prepared me very well. I was very shy, and I do think that homeschooling exacerbated that rather than helped it. That was partly my own fault, though. My mom tried to get me to do some community college classes and other things on the side, and I was rather reluctant to do it because I was intimidated by that setting. But once I went to college, I realized how much those sorts of discussions helped broaden me as a person, and I really wished I had done a lot of that earlier on and had been more proactive and extroverted in some of that social arena. I also am not the best math person, but I cannot blame that on my homeschooling background because my brother's a mechanical engineering major who almost double majored in physics. So I don't think it's the homeschooling, it's the fact that I used homeschooling to focus on my passions, which is in fact what he then did. And I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing at all. If I decide to homeschool my children, Eli's teaching math. So, yes. Yeah, thanks for having me.